Good afternoon, officially, everybody. I am Scott Fuller. I'm the Director of Admissions at Fusion Academy here in the Houston Galleria. I hear that we have a couple people from across the nation. There are 82 Fusion campuses across the nation. I'm just the Director of Admissions for the one in the Houston Galleria, but we're a completely personalized private school for 6th through 12th graders. Everything we do is one student to one teacher. And we do rolling admissions. So we don't have traditional terms, so you can be admitted at any point. If you're, failing classes, need course recovery over the summer, we do 20% off of all of our courses for credit as well. So if you know anybody that would be a good fit or be interested, send them my way. I'll drop my info in the chat. Pam or Julie, you're up next.
Go ahead, Julie. You're muted, Julie. There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Pomerantz, and I'm with the Hub Houston. Hub is an acronym for Heard, Understood, Believed in. Our programs are in Northwest Houston, and we pretty much cover the population of those young adolescents, teens, young adults who are on the autism spectrum. Some of our students and young adult members are not on the autism spectrum, but they might have anxiety, ADHD, a medical issue. So several reasons why they would come to the Hub. We have a school for ages 13 to 18. And we also have 3 different young adult programs. We have Club Hub, which is a social club that meets 3 nights a week and 1 weekend day a month, serving ages 18 and up. We also have Life 101, which is a daytime program for young adults 18 and over. It's an employability program. We're helping these young adults gain meaningful employment. While they're waiting, we offer a variety of classes for them to take. And finally, we have Aspire Accessories, which again is for the 18 and up population. And we refer to our members there as artisans. They create magnificent items that are sold at markets and online, and they earn minimum wage. The parents still pay a fee for the program, but they earn minimum wage. And it's just about helping them through their next steps in life and just helping them to have comfort in knowing they have a place to go, work, earn some money, and just feel really good about what they do. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Pam?
Hi, I'm Pam Esser. I'm Executive Director of ADA Southern Region, which is Attention Deficit Disorders Association. We have free virtual support groups throughout the month. Most months we are taking off June and July, but we will have some other Zoom things and activities. And then we also do workshops. Sometimes they're virtual, but we just had our first in-person one with Crystal Collier on neuroscience for the neurodiverse. And luckily we were able to find someone to record it. So it will be released again as a webinar sometime in the near future. So check us out. We have a newsletter. We have a In the Know, and we do have memberships. So I've put our website in there with a correction because I left a letter off, and we'd love to see you on Zoom. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Well, hi, everyone. We're so excited for today's topic. Thank you for attending. I'm Alexandra Roark. I'm the Assistant Director at Houston Neuroscience Brain Center, and I'm here with Dr. Ron, who's our director here. At HNBC, we prioritize looking for the root cause of the issue instead of just putting a Band-Aid on things. So we offer EEG and QEEG services to look for neurological causes for symptoms. And our EEG reports help create an individualized treatment plan to address our clients' goals. And so we offer neurofeedback training, which is a brain training. We offer red light therapy for the brain to promote healing and recovery. And we offer talk therapy services. And we see clients of all ages. We do have an exciting event coming up next Tuesday, May 21st from 11 to 1 p.m. We're going to be giving presentations around our services. Dr. Ron's going to give a short presentation at 11:30. going over in detail the importance of EEG, QEEG brain mapping, and helping identify issues and neurological causes in coming up with the treatment plans. And so if you could RSVP, we're going to have some lunch. So just to make sure we have enough food. If you're interested, I'm going to go ahead and just send out the flyer to everyone today. So RSVP for that. And with that, I will introduce our speaker, Dr. Rusty Turner. He is the owner of Network Neurology Health LLC, an integrative neuroscience mentoring practice based out of Charleston, South Carolina. And as a neuroscientist with almost 40 years of experience, Dr. Turner is a skilled neurologist and epileptologist.
Easy for me to say.
Easy for Dr. Ron to say. He's trained in EEG, clinical neurophysiology, electrodiagnostic medicine, pediatrics and child adult neurology, epilepsy, neuromuscular diseases, neurodevelopmental medicine, clinical research, biostats, and epidemiology. Dr. Turner currently holds multiple academic, clinical, and research positions in South Carolina and other states. After medical school, he completed an internship and residency in pediatrics at UNMC in Nebraska and completed 2 specialty fellowships in neurology and clinical neurophysiology in Richmond, Virginia, followed by both academic and private practices. And he has over 10 board and subspecialty certifications. So we are so excited to hear you present today, Dr. Turner. I'm going to turn it over to you.
I forgot to give him permission. I'll make you co-host, Rusty.
Can you share, please? Thank you.
I'm going to right now. Your co-host, go ahead. You can take the screen.
Like we learned to share back in kindergarten. Good. Thank you very much, Ron. Well, thank you. We will try to, I think this is called Conversations with, well, let me share screen. Let me go there. All right. And thank you for your introduction. Let me get the screen straight, get the schedule off. Sorry, I had it the PowerPoint up, but now I made that one for you, Ron. I thought that was good. So I'll probably keep this just so I can see, and you will see, Ron, that it still says 258 slides. Don't worry. This is not going to be an attempt at photic stimulation, but one of the things that I want to do, especially with some of the introductions of your hosts, and one thing that came to mind, we've all been incredibly versed and experienced in working with the increasing identification and problems with attentional disorders, of course, and spectrum disorders. And what it just triggered, this isn't part of the flow of the talk, but I sent these to Dr. Ron recently and have the privilege now of collaborating. You can find these in the public domain. Dr. Martha Herbert is a pediatric neurologist, very experienced through the years, trained Harvard and Mass General, a few places like that. But she is one of the very few in the neurology world that gets the incredible links, and it's not just screens. I'll touch a little bit on screens. We can touch a little bit on blue light, but that's just the surface. That's just less than the tip of the iceberg. But over 10 years ago, she co-authored 2 really good, and this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the literature that's available on this. I call it a hot topic, not because it's hot radioactively, perhaps, but it's usually not hot when you want to talk about things like social media and all that. You get a lot of attendance, and then let's talk about electromagnetic radiation. Crickets? Anybody hear the crickets? So anyway, this is a part 1 and part 2, and the links aren't just with the screens. And I remember as tablets started coming out, and so many of both in my whole family, but also in work, watching kids come alive with devices, particularly in the spectrum. And they're incredible tools, but tools need to be used carefully. And unfortunately, we haven't done that because we've been told, hey, everything's cool, everything's safe, kind of like we were told about smoking back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. But anyway, 2-part paper, just make a note. You can find these in the public domain. If not, Dr. Ron or his team can send them to you too. So very good papers. So I've used to call this presentation dealing with electromagnetic. Oh, and by the way, in Martha's paper, she used this term EMF. A couple quick acronym definitions. EMF, electromagnetic frequency, that whole thing we learned about back in elementary, middle school, high school, that science, electromagnetic spectrum, because that's what we live in. And then RFR, radio frequency radiation. If you're astute enough to look at the stuff that's hidden in most of our devices and our phones, specific absorption rate, SAR, is a term used in the telecommunications industry all the time. All of our phones, every device has a specific absorption rate. Radiation gets absorbed really no matter what the frequency. Obviously, it depends on the frequency and what that has. So anyway, environmental toxins is what we're talking about. You're all familiar with, we live in a much more toxic world. Sorry, let me turn that off. Many, many toxins have been incriminated. Dr. Ron and team look very carefully for those things. Dietary, environmental toxins. And then the biggest one that's probably kind of ignored really is environmental radiation in the form, and now I term it wireless. 60, 70 years ago, it was called microwave radiation. So it's been around. The problem is it's just so much more pervasive. And unfortunately, it's, for the most part, except to people who have more sensitivity and can detect it, it's invisible. We can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, hear it. And if you do have sensitivity and have any of those things that you can hear it, or you do have a sensitivity to it, and you go see a healthcare provider, they're going to send you over to the counselor or the psychiatrist, because obviously, it's not your, anyway, there's still a lot of education. And this is, although maybe a new so-called hot topic, it's not new. And I'll touch a little bit on that. What I plan to do, Ron, is I would love to maybe make it more conversational. If people want to please ask questions, because Dr. Ron knows how I can talk and talk and talk, and then I get down rabbit holes. Sometimes my nickname is Squirrel, so I will talk to me about ADHD. Okay. So the big issue, this impacts, and I'll show you a couple just overview slides, basically trying to present this is the magnitude of the issue, and we're essentially unaware of it. And this isn't a conspiracy talk. This isn't, there's so much controversy, and we use controversy to throw stuff off the screen, no pun intended. But many, many things, they're explaining the symptoms, even going back to a lot of the genetic things going on in utero, with moms increasingly exposed to electromagnetic radiation through the pregnancy, correlate with data why we're seeing so many more disorders, including autism spectrum and all the factors with that. So I don't have any commercial interests, and not being paid to talk here. Ron would never pay me to do this. He pays me to be quiet sometimes, like, okay, be quiet, I'll get you some coffee. Down the road, if you take an interest in this, and I hope you do, because once you see this is more than enjoying your lunchtime, if that's what you're doing. This is more, gives you acid indigestion. It's like, it's a big issue, and it's much easier to live inside the matrix and not be aware, but more importantly, not see the correlation of what's happening with the kiddos that we see in our schools, in our homes. And but three of the, I think, four top websites. Environmental Health Trust is a great source of information. And they, of course, go into things like blue light and all that, but we're not talking primarily about blue light. And yes, it's real. It's part of the blue light or ultraviolet spectrum that we stare at light all the time. And as humans, we weren't designed to stare at light. Light was always meant to, has always through history, illumined what we do in the world. And in 1927, when the electric television was invented, obviously it's changed a lot in the last almost 100 years, we started staring at light. And prior to that, kind of the only things that stared at light were maybe bugs, right? Do you ever, anyway. Environmental Health Trust, great resource. Physicians for Safe Technology, very good resource. Parents for Safe Technology. And one I increasingly turn to is babysafeproject.org. And one of the collaborators with that website is currently the chair of OBGYN at Yale. And we're having a conference there the first week in June at Yale. I'm going to shut my doors just in case. It's beautiful outside, but sometimes I'm on the flight path, so I apologize for that. Conference, the EMF annual conference, and the physician that's the head of OBGYN understands what's going on from the standpoint of prenatal development, even before conception, and what's going on. So again, if you want to test any of the things that I say, please don't trust me. I'm a doctor. Do your own homework. And these are great resources, I think, to do that. So this is the key slide with 4 slides on it, and is not meant to take notes on, but the takeaway is 4 points, basically. And I've said it for years. I believe it more and more, and I think it's understandable. We are created electromagnetic beings living in an electromagnetic universe world, which influences electromagnetic beings. So we're not just talking about humans, and we may touch on some of the animal models. Over 15 years ago, National Geographic put out its first documentary on how our electromagnetic pollution is influencing the migratory patterns of mammals. And now we know what's happening with vanishing species in the insects world, in the plant world, the bee species. It's all being affected by many of the toxins, mostly by the electromagnetic sensitivity. So this first little mini slide here, and this will pop up a few times as we keep going. We are electromagnetic beings. That's the way we're made. And I like to stress we are electromagnetic in nature. We're not electrochemical. Chemicals are important. They have a lot of benefit. Medications work, but they're only, for the most part, a temporizing solution. They can then help. If somebody has severe life-threatening depression, they go on an antidepressant. That may get them to the point where other modalities will help. But we know from looking at so-called healthcare for the last many years, we're not doing a very good job with chronic healthcare problems. So brain, the neurons, spinal cord, cardiovascular, our gut, and our genitourinary systems are all electromagnetic in the way they work. And the way I like to make that analogy, if unfortunately the way too many times I've had to do this in my profession, how do we define somebody as brain dead? They have no electrical activity on their EEG. We don't say they have no chemical activity. We don't. Same thing. How do we know somebody's had a heart attack and they died? I don't mean to talk about such happy things, but we say there is no the ECG, the electrocardiogram, is flat. It's an electrical phenomenon. Whenever there's electricity, for the most part, there is current. So we have electromagnetic properties. So that's why I say we do, and we live in a world that with incredible, wonderful things that we're getting from our technology, our telecommunications, things that we have, but it's come with a cost. They don't come without effects. So the second mini slide that we'll touch on are known symptoms that can be produced specifically by Wi-Fi radiation, or A's for artificial electromagnetic radiation. Again, we live in this incredible electromagnetic universe. It keeps us alive. This amazing world that we live on, and all the spheres, the stratospheres and things that help protect us from many of the harmful influences. If we get to it, we'll talk about there's a particular gap that has nothing to do with anyway, it has nothing to do with a lot of the toxins, but there's a gap in that sphere in the gigahertz and terahertz range, which is directly communicating with space. That's why the satellites work the way they do. Because if we had this gap all the way around the Earth, satellites, we couldn't use satellites. And they clearly do important stuff. And now we have SpaceX and the big war or competition for space telecommunications. It's a big world. We have about 11 or 12,000 satellites now, projected to go up to 40,000 and more in the near future, circling around. And so that increases our exposure to electromagnetic radiation, artificial electromagnetic radiation, especially even more as we have the deployment eventually of 6G beyond 5G. So symptoms are known and predictable, and often we don't think of that. I don't know how many discussions we have when I'm looking at EEGs, and we think of with all these things and how we're going to treat these, but we, as you introduced at the beginning when you introduced Dr. Ron, causes. We want to get down to root causes. We have to treat the symptoms. If somebody has meningitis, I'm going to treat their fever with an anti-fever medication, but that's not treating the underlying cause of the meningitis. People need to feel better. We need to help their symptoms. So we'll break that down quickly. And then I won't spend as much time. This is where we get the privilege of spending so many hours going through EEGs and things with Dr. Ron and his team and a lot of other folks. But there are predictable changes that come from the EEG, from the effects of electromagnetic radiation. And again, going back to one of those earlier slides, it should come as no surprise, and I'm not a physicist, but some of us took the basic science. An electromagnetic field will influence a nearby electromagnetic field, period. That's just basic physics. And because our brain is an electromagnetic field, our body is, all those fields are affected. Eventually, if you're next to a radiation source, it's going to have symptoms expressed in your body and brain, but you'll see it in the EEG. You can also see it in the ECG. And that's one of the etiologies of the increasing crisis with sudden cardiac death that we're seeing all over the world in all ages and otherwise presumably healthy people. So there's characteristic findings that collectively are very important, and that's been described for probably in the best literature over 30 years. And that started when they and continue to do study after nuclear disasters. So of course, multiple Chernobyl disasters in 1986 and 1987, they still continue to follow and study the survivors and the cleanup workers. And they have rather predictable radiation effects, even long-term. And if any of you have experienced or have family or friends that have been through radiation therapy for some type of a cancer, it just doesn't stop with the radiation therapy. The side effects can continue or increasingly show up. And then the last thing we'll touch on a little bit is, after giving you this wonderful, up, happy, cheerful discussion, which hopefully won't disturb your lunch or wonderful cup of coffee or tea, what do we do? There are so many things to do. And Dr. Ron mentioned things like with the blue light. That's a small part, but it's a big part of what I do. We're staring at screens. And if anybody knows what does the it's been many years, the American Academy of Pediatrics, how many hours do they recommend screen use in a 5-year-old? I don't know if anybody's unmuted. I don't have the screen up. Yeah, was that a 0, Dr. Ron?
That was a 0.
It was, yeah. And then after 5, they have changed, and being now a grandfather with 6 grandkids, kind of fun. They do say an hour, maybe, particularly like FaceTime or something with grandparents. So I like that part, with supervision. And yet, how do we do that in a world that's increasingly, including with our educational systems, which are almost completely dependent on screen times and things like that? And we're not one of the countries of the world that has gone back to wired connections. One of the most recent countries was Cyprus, where they took their educational institutions and they went back to wired hookup instead of wireless, because many countries understand a bit better of the toxins that we're playing with. So anyway, we'll talk about some of the good things. So that's slide 4. We only have 254 to go. That would make Dr. Ron happy. Don't worry, we're going to go through stuff quickly. So I don't have the attendance. So if something comes up in a chat that people would like to do it or just speak up, please do so.
I'll let you know if anyone puts anything in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Alexander. Wi-Fi radiation, artificial electromagnetic radiation, affects every electromagnetic system. I should change that. It's not nervous system, but all of it's controlled with the nervous system, right? That's why the brain's so important. But it begins before conception and it continues until, unfortunately, death. And so I was going to just throw in there too, with the whole thing before conception. Current estimates are 1 in 5 couples are unable to conceive now. That's severe, that's pretty significant. And at least part of that, I think, is explainable on the basis of most of our electromagnetic use when we're using devices, apart from just what's in the 5G or whatever wireless environment that we're living and working in, is along our electromagnetic axis. If you remember that early slide, the brain, the cardiovascular and the pulmonary system, the gut and the genital urinary system, they work electromagnetically. And where do we use our phones and our laptops and things like that? So that has, so it's more thinking, how do we change what we do? Because we're not going to get rid of, anybody want to get rid of their phone, computer? Well, you might want to throw it out the window sometimes, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
So Wi-Fi radiation contributes to symptoms of mental ill health and neurological dysfunction. And it's not just that, it's bigger than that. But if we don't think about it, we won't identify it. And then we may help people get better with medications, with the miracle of neurofeedback and other incredible stuff like that. But it's not getting as deep to the root of the problem. Reducing exposure to Wi-Fi radiation reduces and or eliminates signs and symptoms, improve function, and decrease neuroinflammation. And if you spent any time with Dr. Ron, and others, the importance of what's happening with neuroinflammation, and that's a hot topic, no pun intended, and it's definitely increasing. And there's many reasons for it, particularly from the gut. But one of those, radiation produces neuroinflammation. That's been known for many, many decades. And the other thing is, you're like Steve, who came in, and others who are using things like biofeedback, neurofeedback in our practices. Wi-Fi radiation in our lives interferes with responses or improvements to biofeedback and neurofeedback, and other neuromodulation modalities. And of course, don't forget about iTech, and Dr. Ron has done some presentations on that, and that's a big issue. Social media is currently a kind of a big concern. We talk about it, I can post it if I need to, but I don't know how many of you know, it's been about 6 or 7 months now, but last year the Surgeon General, I'll show that in a little bit, but the Surgeon General put out one of their warnings, almost probably more important than the one they put out in 1964, when the Surgeon General's office finally said smoking is not good for you, hazardous to your health. And here we are a few decades later. But they put out one on the dangers of social media to children and adolescents. And they said social media, the quote they used, the statement they said, "We cannot conclude that social media is sufficiently safe for use in children and adolescents. And we recommend immediate actions be taken to ameliorate or remedy the situation." That's a pretty big statement. I think Dr. Ron and I, we were talking yesterday about that. If we took the term social media and put in methamphetamine, we cannot conclude that methamphetamine is sufficiently safe for children and adults. We would have a total different reaction, right? But here we are. So I'll come on.
Dr. Turner, we have a
Yes,
question that came in.
Yes.
They asked, when you mention screen time, does that include TV, or is it referring to iPad, phone, computer?
Good question. Let me change here a little bit. So I will come back to slide 6 in just a minute, but we won't spend a lot of time on that. But when we talk about the blue light effect, and actually this slide is perhaps a little bit better when you look at what are sources of electromagnetic frequencies. Any screen emits, and even our little phones emit so much more than the TV of 80 or 90 years ago. Light is energy. Light is measured in frequency and wavelength, but the critical third factor with that is the energy. That's why we don't want to sit around gamma radiation too much, because it's so energetically powerful. So yes to the question TV. So how do you do it? I always recommend blue light glasses if you're watching TV. With the TV screens or with the computer screens, there's something here called f.lux, which is a screen protector. It actually helps filter. We call it the blue light effect. It's actually violet, not blue, when you look at the spectrum. But yes, it does come out of the television as well. But if you put a filter on your TV, and unfortunately, Zoom doesn't work this way, it doesn't show up the change on the screen. But when I turn on this filter, basically it's screening out, it's filtering out the violet blue 400 to 450 nanometers. That's the harmful part that we shouldn't be staring at, but we do. And what you can see in my glasses is this, it changed. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that, Dr. Ron? How it gets a little bit orangey in the glasses. I don't know if it's showing up or not, but it doesn't show up on the screen. So I've never been very good at giving a concise answer to an excellent question, and that's part of the problem. Yes, it's any screen. The problem is with a lot of the devices is, of course, we hold them much closer, and I'll have a couple pictures showing the specific absorption rate of phones, tablets, laptops, and the same thing. So unfortunately, the further you look, it's kind of an issue.
Hey,
So,
Rusty, one
yes,
thing,
sir.
if they can see this, this is an instrument you can get.
Yeah, the tri-field meter, yes.
Yeah, and this can measure it. So if you're the type of person that just wants to see if Rusty is telling the truth, you can verify it yourself, because these things are really accurate, and they'll tell you how much of a field you're getting from all your electromagnetic fields in your area.
Okay, yeah. And they're easy. I think it's $70 or $80 if you want to do that. And usually once people get those, you start doing it, and then you realize, yeah, it's there. And it's kind of like the Geiger, remember the Geiger counter in the movies or in your science course, and you get to the radiation. This is what we're talking about. So different part of it. Go ahead.
If anybody locally wants to borrow it, I'll lend it out
Yeah.
all the time. Just come by my office and pick it up, check your house out.
Yeah. And if we go into Wi-Fi radiation, what I'm not going to talk about too is things like dirty electricity and the whole issues with the breakdown in our wiring systems. And some people, clinicians, Jessica, you know that well, the difficulty of 60 hertz interference, and especially in older buildings, and then having the towers nearby and so on. So back to a couple quick things. When we talked about this, we created EEG changes, solutions, that's enough. So I'm going to avoid this other than just saying this is not new. Wi-Fi radiation problems, when you go back to the bibliography, which is about 4,000 very well published articles and studies going back to the 1940s. So this is not new. In 1996, the World Health Organization instituted their International EMF Project, 1996. And illustrated the magnitude of the problem. This study just got published, where they went through the which I think is significant, again, just being a neurologist, the Global Burden of Disease Study. It's a cumulative study in the recent release Nervous System Disorders, which includes mental health disorders and ADHD and all the other stuff that we see, is 43% of the population has some type of a neurological disorder. So I think Houston, we have a problem. So I love saying that. That's kind of fun. So we'll go through quickly. As I said, this is one of the key points. Remembering we have, it's the chemistry. We have all that stuff too, but that's secondary. And that's one of the amazing things that I was able to experience after I kind of woke up from the matrix and started learning about heretics like Dr. Swatsina and others around the world, that there's other things to do to help people get better, and neurofeedback and other things and lifestyle changes, watching people get better, and many, many times wean or get off medications. So we've got mechanisms. I'll touch on that. We live in a very different world than we did 10, 20, even 30 years ago. I'll show that. And basically, this is a small picture, but this is a Wi-Fi map in 2002. This is a Wi-Fi map in 2018, and it's exponentially changed even since then in 2024. As I said, National Geographic came out with one of their first early documentaries 10 years ago, and even before that. But if we're affecting mammals, and I haven't seen a bird with a Bluetooth on lately. I haven't seen a bear with Wi-Fi in their dens. Might have them, but it's a big issue. Familiar slide. This is the blow up of the mini one. We are electromagnetic beings. This is how we're working. And if we weren't, all this stuff that we're talking about with neurofeedback and dietary changes would make not much of a difference, but it does. So this is borrowed from the 2021 electromagnetic frequency medical conference. And unfortunately, it's not logarithmic. It shows this didn't just start with the invention of the laptop computer or the cell phone or something like that. We have been exposed more and more as humans to these incredible things, going back with light bulbs and light. And we need these. I want these things, but it's a big issue. Electrosmog is not a popular term, but when people started talking about environmental pollution back in the 60s and 70s, they were mostly ignored, shunned, whatever, called Yule Gibbons or whatever. So,
well, one thing I want to point out before you go on that I thought was real interesting. Why don't you tell them in every city where the maximum amount of EMF exists? It was an interesting article you told me about last week.
Well, and see if this helps with that answer, Ron, but I don't have any disclosures, but I do have a lot of opinions, and here we are. And I'm always open. I don't debate, and I'm not into arguing, but I'm always in for discussion and new learning. What I have seen and experienced from the science, and as I stay more and more involved in this field, the most electromagnetically toxic places on Earth are hospitals and airports. They're the most electromagnetically dense. And here in Charleston, at our magnificent children's hospital, when they built the new mega hospital, and they just built another new mega children's hospital in Atlanta, same thing. There's an iPad on almost every crib on the pediatric floor. And of course, they also have all the junk food machines on the floors, which is a long story of how they tried to fight that, but the funding couldn't overcome that. So anyway, so it's just, but you need that technology. When you're in the hospital, when you're on a plane and your pilots are doing their job, you want that stuff. We need that stuff. So it's important, but how do we understand its implications and what do we do to stay safe?
Okay, Rusty, before you go on, we've got some questions here. Might as well, Alexandra.
Yeah, we have one in the chat. She says, my immediate neighbor of 23 years is an amateur hammer and has a huge antenna in his backyard as well as 3 antennas on his roof. Sounds like I should be concerned. What can you tell me about this and resources I can make use of to convince him to take them down?
I think that last part, resources I can, well, convince him to take them down. And don't start there. I mean, first look at, again, if you live in a multiple dwelling and people have their 5G, you're not going to get the, I could go to the hospital or go to the hotel where we stayed in Denver for AAPB and say, hey, can you turn off the Wi-Fi for the hospital? I mean, for the hotel? It's not going to work. So people, unless they understand that there's a problem, they're not going to be open to it. Those websites that I looked at or referred to, Environmental Health Trust, Physicians for Safe Technology, Parents for Safe Technology, pick one of those and just talk about antennas. And some of us remember in the 70s and 80s as all the high tower, wire towers started going up and the increased incidence of leukemias that were associated in neighborhoods affiliated and contiguous with those. So it's a problem. And as you're more aware, it's my goal is to help people be informed and what do we do about it to try to help be aware, protect ourselves. And anything electromagnetically, distance is your friend. So always, I don't carry things on my body. If I do, I put my phone in my back pocket on the right side, farthest away from my cardiovascular system, and where there tends to be more padding and all that sorts of stuff, things like that. So again, they're great tools. It's understanding sometimes Is this extremely low frequency, like under 300 hertz, or is it higher frequency? And so those websites, I think, have really good information of what you can do. I wouldn't jump over to your neighbors at this. I mean, you could and say, would you please take those down? May not work. Hey, Eric, I just saw you. Good to see you. Sorry,
We
you
got
popped
another,
up on my
we got
screen.
another question here, Rusty. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have 3 more questions. Do you want me to go ahead and get into the questions, or did you want to finish up the slide?
Let me just, again, nothing new. Dr. Becker, who helped, he's an orthopedic physician that helped develop electromagnetic frequency. And this is one of his older books. It's a couple decades old, but The Perils of Electropollution, The Promise of Electromedicine. Just like nuclear energy is incredible. It can empower the earth. It can do incredible things, and it can destroy us and destroy the world. It's how we use things. And he said in the 1970s early, I have no doubt in my mind, at the present time, the greatest polluting element in the Earth's environment is the proliferation of electromagnetic fields. I think he would be rolling over now, just how things have changed. So, and again, the literature is there. That's not what we're going to go through. So much literature. I can point you to the websites that, because if it's real, where's the evidence? If it's real, why did they roll out 5G with no human studies to show its ramifications? I don't have good answers for those kinds of things. So go ahead, Alexandra, if you want to. So,
Okay, yeah. So the first question asks is, does the Earth also have radiation and receive radiation? If so, what is the difference in impact between the terrestrial type of radiation and wireless?
excellent question. So we're doing good, Dr. Ron, slide 15. But let me hit some of the highlight slides. So working with a colleague in Vancouver who's developed a wonderful computer project. Oh, looking at the mechanisms. Here we go. So when we look at slides like this, it's like, well, what do we do and how much of that? So we have this natural terrestrial, as you said, biosphere, this incredible world that we live in. And so natural EMR, Schumann resonance, things like that, tend to be healthy. I mean, things like grounding, we're so much more disconnected from our physical creation that we live in, and that's a problem. So there's different aspects on the polarization that explain, I think, some of the cellular mechanism and biological mechanisms, why the difference is. But when we talk about, and the way he's chosen to word it on this slide, and I think what is man-made electromagnetic pollution, as opposed to the natural biospheric electromagnetic environment, it's there. And when you look at things like global warming from the ozone problems and things like that, that's one thing. But that's not always the major issue that's going on. But there's this huge, so again, a long maybe answer. I hope it's answering the question that the things we do are great tools, but we need to be aware of what they do, and we don't want to overuse. And this may help answer a little bit of it too. If you can see in the middle of this slide, there's the typical, remember when you go to the airport, and by the way, does anybody know when we quit calling them the X-ray scanner at the airport? Now they're just called the scanners. We quit using the term X-ray, but those are based on millimeter waves. Millimeter wave is 5G. And so that's how we do it, because 5G penetrates at least 6 centimeters into us, our whole bodies, when we're in a 5G environment. That will exponentially increase with the deployment of 6G. But that's why, would you want to stand in the scanner all day at the airport? No, you just get through. Thank God I got through. Now I can go get on my plane. And we've surpassed the microwave radiation. Some years ago, I would start, when kids were asking questions about it, I said, should you stick your head in a microwave? Since it's like a duh, no doc, that's kind of stupid. Well, what's the frequency of microwave? 2.5 or 3 gigahertz, in that range. And yet we've surpassed that. So that's why distance is our friend. So I tend to think that's why I label it Wi-Fi or artificial electromagnetic radiation, the human created stuff that we have done. Great tools, even like electricity. Electricity is an incredible tool, but it's also had effects. And a very fascinating book. Sometime it's a challenging book. It's a little bit of an Eeyore. I'm a Winnie the Pooh fan, but an Eeyore book. It's called Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, The History of Electricity and Life. And Eric, if you ever get time to read that, I would love to know what you think if you haven't read it already. So, yep, thank you, Ron. And it's a thick book. A third of it is the references. It's a heavy book, and you think you'll feel good after this presentation. You know, and it's like, insert me back into the matrix. It's too much. I can't handle it. So we'll move on from here.
One of the things, Rusty, we're about to 10 minutes to go.
Okay.
What was that? The one book you always recommend about for parents to read for their children. What is the name of that book?
The one for screens?
Yeah, Disconnect or
yeah, Reset Your Child's Brain when you're looking for Victoria Dunkley is a child psychiatrist in California. 10 years ago, she wrote the book Reset Your Child's Brain. She coined a term called electronic screen syndrome. And those of you here that are clinicians, if you see anybody who has dysregulated mood, impaired cognition, or dysfunctional behavior, ever seen that before in your schools or your practices? Like, is this the only problem, screens? No, but it's a huge part. And you can go to her website. I didn't endorse her book. I don't pay for any of that stuff, but she has some really good teaching videos and things. So that's a big deal when we look at electronic screen. And that's not, when she comes out with her new edition, she'll have a lot more talking about the blue light. But this is more similar to what Dr. Mari Swingle talks about in her book, Eye Minds. And Eric, you have your book too that you can recommend as well when we look at, we need to be aware of this. So hope that touched on that one, Ron.
Yeah, please. That was a good one. And it's not as thick a book, and it's a much easier read.
Yeah.
All parents who are having issues with those types of things with their children should read that book.
Yeah, and to start small, go to her website and just look at a couple or some of her YouTube videos. They're very informative. Quickly, the other key point, the second key point, we won't really get to EEG changes, but what I'm seeing is it's confirming what they started seeing within 3 to 5 years after Chernobyl, the correlated EEG changes that are responsible. And obviously a nuclear disaster is very different than from, you know, the spectrum of radiation we're dealing with, the problem we're dealing with more. These are known side effects of radiation therapy and Wi-Fi. It affects the nervous system. It affects the skin because those derive from the same place embryologically, cardiothoracic, gastrointestinal, genital urinary, our endocrine system. What's happened to somebody when they get radiation? What happens to their bone marrow? It tends to get affected. So it affects our immune systems. We have musculoskeletal symptoms with pain, balance, and so on. And I break that down into a lot more detail when we do things like some of the workshops to try to help illustrate, like, oh, that's what's going on. I hadn't thought about that issue. So
Rusty, if you could, I do think it would be important if you could mention some of the things we're seeing on EEGs that are consistent, because that's what we do here. If you're concerned about it, we can see if your child's brain has these patterns. Would you just briefly talk about that?
Yep. And again, this is the Surgeon General. I mentioned this earlier. You can get it free. Just go to the Surgeon General's website, hhs.gov. Social media. We cannot conclude social media is sufficiently safe for children and adolescents, but that's just part of it. That's social media. That's not the blue light. That's not the environmental thing. And what I do typically in a much more detailed and highly exciting workshop is talk about the mechanisms. We know cellular mechanisms. They have been established, how electromagnetic radiation works at the cellular level, what membrane effects and things that's having. And that results in predictable biological effects. And this is leading to the EEG thing, Ron. And we know artificial environmental electromagnetic radiation, or radio frequency radiation, RFR, affects oxidative systems And again, it's the hidden thing in the environment. We're talking about those things more and more. It's definitely affecting what's going on with mitochondrial dysfunction throughout the world and throughout our bodies, which affects EEG amplitudes, demyelination, all the developmental and genetic issues we're seeing, neurotransmitters, neurochemicals, on and on. Particularly the blood-brain barrier is affected by environmental radiation. And that explains a lot of things too, and why we're seeing more developmental anomalies. So that's the biological effects, and understanding that, it kind of makes sense that when you have a neurotoxicant, a toxin is something that occurs naturally in the environment, like botulinum toxin. A neurotoxicant, if you want to use the term correctly, is a human, it's a human-derived toxin. So they call them toxicants, like pesticides and herbicides and things like that, just for the tune. But those things tend to be non-specific. I call them equal opportunity destroyers. They can affect all the organ systems differently, and they may show up in different ways. And then that's what we do with the symptoms, and that's been well described. And as you start seeing, these are the symptoms of, where'd the slide go? Okay, never mind. But when you start to see it, it's like, what system doesn't it affect, and what do we do about it? So one of those systems is the EEG. And so we can see that there's biomarkers. Most of the time they're not recognized. And when I started seeing these things more and more over the last years, then discovered this has been written about in the literature for over 30 years, particularly in the Russian and Ukrainian literature, which is sadly seldom, if ever, published in the American environment. We tend to discriminate or against those things, but the things that were described over 30 years ago that we're seeing, and it's not all of these, it's just, it can be a combination. There's increasing fast activity, the fast waves in the EEG. We see changes over time, as you would expect somebody who's been exposed to radiation. Their PDR, their posterior dominant rhythm, will slow down. Everything will get lower in amplitude over time, and that can come from other things as well. There's slowing that will show up in the EEG. There's the early development of spike wave discharges, which can harbinger the increased incidence of development of seizures and epilepsy, which we're seeing particularly in younger and younger children. And then its effect diffusely on the whole circadian and ultradian systems and how that's manifested in sleep. So that's kind of a quick thing with that. We have lots of EEG samples, and some of them, when I do an updated workshop or something, I generally go to the last week of EEGs that Dr. Ron and I have gone through, and it's there. There's samples that we can show. So that's what we talk about a lot. And what I'll probably bring this one out soon. We haven't started using this, but I've developed an electromagnetic health questionnaire, because if we don't think about it, we're not going to ask about it. There's so many other things we're looking at which are important in people's lives. But if we don't realize how pervasive this is, and more importantly, how this might be affecting our health, and not everybody's affected the same way, right? Not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer. And in there, with the earlier question about the antennas and towers, where are the towers? Where are the smart technology in your home? Where's your smart meter? Since almost all states, except Arizona, have converted from good old analog meters to smart meters. Where are our Wi-Fi? Where are the boosters? Where are we sleeping in sleep environment? Where are electronic devices? Because they're not very safe. So I spend a fair amount of time talking about the sleep sanctuary for people. So that's a lot of things, and there's things we can do. So it's more.
Thank you so much. This was so fascinating. And I know everyone had so many questions, of course, so we didn't get to all of them. So I apologize for that. I wish we could have more time. You can always email us the questions. Dr. Ron at hnbraincenter.com. And we have several comments, Dr. Turner, asking if people can have access to your slides. How do you feel about that?
They keep evolving. One of the more recent ones when I talked about some of this was on the New Mind listserv. If you go to YouTube and you just type my name, ignore all the bad stuff, just look at the and if you do that and just type in electromagnetic, it should come up of a lunch and learn that I've done for them. So that will cover some of this. I usually, this is in the context of what I talk about prescribing meds as a physician, but I tell people the meds I'm talking about are moving, eating, disconnecting, sleeping. Those are the 4 pillars of physiologic health. And we should be looking at all that long before, well, or science synonymous with prescribing medications. Thank you, Eric. Moving, eating, disconnecting, sleeping. And it's more than just how much time are you on screens. So much more than that. And,
yes. So
okay,
true.
I like that.
Love that last bit. I'm going to keep that one in mind for sure. Well, everyone, please tune in for our next discussions with Dr. Ron. We're going to send out more information. It's going to be on Wednesday, June 19th from 12 to 1 p.m. Central. We will be sending out an email with more information, and then there's going to be a recording of this available in like the next 1 to 2 days, depending on how quick we can get it up. That should also be sent out to you as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It was great spending time with y'all.